Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. I'm your host, Hannah Zaberi. Thank you for joining us on Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim-focused TV channel. You can always watch us 24/7 on Samsung Galaxy 19. Galaxy 19 covers the US, Canada, and Mexico, and on Amazon Fire TV, Roku TV, and Apple TV. The 2020 American Muslim poll was issued yesterday by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU. This is the fifth year in a row that this poll has been conducted and released by the think tank. Some of the key findings this year were that Muslims are more likely than general public to express satisfaction with the direction of the country. Politics, not religion, predicts Islamophobia. And many other things that were quite surprising to those of us who talk about American Muslim issues, write about them. But to discuss this more in detail, I am really honored to have Dalia Mujahid on our show today. She's the Director of Research at ISPU, and where she leads the organization's pioneering research and thought leadership programs on American Muslims. She's the former executive director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, where she led the analysis of surveys of Muslim communities worldwide. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Dalia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, alhamdulillah, I wanted to, so tell us a little bit more about the history of this poll first.
Absolutely. So 5 years ago, we decided to do an American Muslim poll at ISPU. And it was very important for us to not only survey Muslims, but to also survey other faith communities so that we weren't just studying Muslims as an isolated specimen. We were understanding Muslims within their faith, landscape of the country. So we did the very first time, 2016, a poll of American Muslims, American Jews, as well as the general public. And then we were able to break out the general public into the major faith groups. And this poll is really important because it is the only systematic measure of American Muslim opinion, viewpoints, demographics that happens every single year and has a comparison with other faith communities and non-faith communities in America, really giving American Muslims a voice that is representative.
Mm-hmm. So one of the key findings and we're going to concentrate a little bit about your findings on Islamophobia, because this is, as we head into the election cycle, and this is something that you've talked about a lot, is Islamophobia rises in an election year. What were some of the findings this year that were surprising to you?
So there were several things that were surprising. So first, just to back up a little bit, Hannah, and explain to your viewers our Islamophobia index. So 3 years ago, we created what is called an Islamophobia index. And what that means is we look at 5 different questions and we measure the level of agreement a respondent has with 5 different anti-Muslim tropes. And we look at that year to year to gauge how things are changing, what groups have endorsed Islamophobic tropes more than others, and so forth. And so first, I just want to explain that the 5 tropes or the 5 stereotypes we look at weren't chosen haphazardly. They are based on previous research that other academics have done that shows that endorsement of these 5 stereotypes is linked to agreement with anti-Muslim policies. So the 5 tropes are Muslims are more violent than other people. Specifically, American Muslims are more prone to violence, discriminate against women is the second. Third is are partially responsible for acts of violence done by another Muslim, collective blame, in other words. The fourth is are hostile to the United States. And then the 5th are less civilized than other people. So those 5 tropes We chose them because when people believe those things about Muslims, they are more comfortable with surveillance of Muslims. They're more comfortable with the Muslim ban. They even it goes as far as to being comfortable taking away Muslim Americans' right to vote. So these 5 points of view are very important to measure year to year. And so what did we find out this year? The first thing we found is that this year, actually, Islamophobia has not gone up dramatically from the year before, from 2019. It's about the same as in 2019 in terms of the percentage of people who endorse these views. The second thing that we found that was maybe more good news is that Jewish Americans, over the past 3 years, which is, of course, you know, during the Trump administration, have consistently decreased in their endorsement of Islamophobic tropes. So they've become more and more positive toward Muslims. In fact, this year, in 2020, American Jews and American Muslims are the same on the Islamophobia index. So it might surprise some of your viewers to know that, yes, some Muslims do endorse anti-Muslim tropes. And this year, the percentage of Muslims and Jews that endorse these tropes was actually equal. I can't hear you.
So can you explain to us how many people are interviewed for this poll? And are the numbers large enough to make these extrapolations and come to these conclusions?
So thank you, Hannah. Let me explain how polling works, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and there's a lot of people who claim that they're doing a poll and it's not actually scientific. So I've been doing scientific polling for more than a decade. I started out at Gallup, and now I'm with ISPU. What makes a poll scientific and representative is the way the sample is chosen, not just the sample size. So that's really important to keep in mind. I could have a sample of 1 million people that is chosen not randomly. If it's bias, then it's not representative, even though it's huge. Okay. So it's not so much the sample size that we should ask about, it's rather how the sample was chosen. So when the sample is chosen so that it is a representative of the population as a whole, and what that means is that every person has an equal chance of being selected to respond to the survey. We're not excluding people because they don't have a phone or they don't have an internet connection or whatever in populations that might have that as an issue. So our sample is chosen from American households called completely at random. And we include not only landlines, but cell phone numbers. So it's a very representative sample, and it's the size of the sample is 800 respondents, and that's actually a pretty standard number. Pew, when they do their study of Muslims, which they do around every 5 years, their sample size is similar to ours. So it's kind of the industry standard. And the same goes with the Jewish sample as well as the national sample of just Americans as a whole. We use a company called SSRS to do our polling. We don't do it ourselves. We actually hire a third party to do it for us, but we design the questionnaire. So all the questions are us, our scientists and our scholars writing them, but then they actually conduct the interviews and select the respondents. And it's important to know why I mention that is because SSRS does all the polling for the Washington Post, for CNN, for CBS. So this is a nationally recognized top polling firm. And they're the folks that have done our polls for the past 5 years.
Okay. So that would explain, so even though we're seeing in the graphs that maybe two Jewish people have their thoughts on Muslims may have changed or don't express Islamophobia, but that two people represents a trend in society. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, there are definitely more than two people that would have been represented in any of our graphs. So it's the percentage of their sample size. So there's the Jewish sample is 300 people that are in the sample. So, 50% of that would be 150 people that are represented, in the graph. But yes, they would represent Jews as a group in the nation. And specifically to the Jewish community, SSRS specifically is the polling firm that American Jewish organizations use because they are experts on polling religious minorities. That is actually why we found them and commissioned them. So specifically, I'm even more confident of their sample of the Jewish community because they've been, specializing in Jewish polling for years and years. And they're used whenever you read a poll about the views of Jewish Americans, it's going to be SSRS that has conducted it.
Okay. Now, one of the other very critical findings was that, and the word that was used was Muslims uniquely experience institutional religious discrimination. What is meant by uniquely?
Yeah, thank you. So year after year, and we've been doing it, as I said, 5 years, American Muslims report experiencing religious discrimination more than any other faith group. At around 60% of Muslims said that they experienced religious discrimination with some level of frequency in the year before. This year, in 2020, Jewish Americans were similar to Muslims in the percentage that say they experienced it. So we wanted to look at not only the percentage who experienced it, but how they experienced it, where they experienced it. And what made Muslims different from other faith communities was not only that they were more likely to experience it, but they were more likely to experience it in an institutional setting, not just interpersonally. So for what I mean by that is, when we're talking to a friend and they say something Islamophobic, that's an interpersonal experience of religious discrimination. But when we're dealing with law enforcement and they're treating us differently because we're Muslim, that is an institutional type of religious discrimination. Or when we're always the one randomly selected at the airport, where we found that Muslims are twice as likely as the general public to be given secondary screenings when they come back from a trip overseas. That's called institutional Islamophobia or institutional religious discrimination. And where Muslims are different from even other communities like the Jewish community that may experience it with the same level of frequency is we experience religious discrimination both interpersonally and institutionally, whereas Jewish Americans only experience it predominantly in an interpersonal setting. They're not experiencing it when they're applying for a job with law enforcement or at the airport. And that's all self-reported. They're saying that that's not where they're experiencing religious discrimination, but Muslims are far, far more likely than other communities to experience it institutionally.
So, so reading this, so that's at the airport, about 44% of Muslims versus 2% of Jews and 5% of the general public, applying for a job, 33% of Muslims. But when interacting with law enforcement, 31% of Muslims versus 2% of Jews and 8% of the general public. But what really surprised me was when receiving healthcare, 25% versus 5% Jews and the general public. We have so many Muslims in the healthcare field. How do you explain this?
Well, so Hannah, just let me clarify one quick thing. All of these numbers of the 25% who say it was in healthcare or the 33% who said was in interacting with law enforcement, these are all 33% of those who experience discrimination. So it's not of all Muslims. It's just when they say that they've experienced discrimination, then we ask them the second question of where did it happen? So just to explain. Why are people experiencing it in a healthcare setting, even though we have so many Muslim doctors? It's a really good question. And you're right, we are overrepresented in the medical field. I mean, we did one study in Michigan where we found that Muslims are less than 3% of the total population, but they were 15% of the doctors. So it's not, it's not a misconception to say that we are overrepresented in the medical field. We certainly are. But at the same time, even Muslim doctors have experienced Islamophobia from their own patients. Mm-hmm. So, unless you have a Muslim doctor, and everybody does, it's possible to feel that you're being treated differently, unfairly, with different, more offensive questions about where the problem is in your health when you're dealing with healthcare workers. I mean, what we have to remember is whether it's law enforcement or someone in the airport or even a nurse or a doctor, everybody's consuming the same media. Everybody's consuming the same toxic information, and it will come out in their behavior sometimes if they have these, oftentimes unintentional biases toward Muslims.
So I looked at some of the stuff that the polls in the past. So in 2017, the poll, and this is something that we've used. I know I personally have used this in my work, is the institutional bullying of Muslim children, mm-hmm. Your findings in 2017, which were surprising, but were not surprising. Because again, it was not about just Muslim kids being bullied by other Muslim kids, but also by teachers and admin. And so I've seen programs in our community that have resulted based on those findings. What other can you share with us? And we're going to talk about, because what did you find out this year about Muslim children and Islamophobia and religious bullying because of their religion, number one? And number two, what were some of the key developments from past polls that have occurred because of the fact that this information was now available to the general public?
So thank you, Hannah. We asked about bullying a second time in 2020, and we found very similar numbers. Around half of Muslim families with children in K through 12 schools say that their child was bullied because of their faith, and Muslims are twice as likely to report this kind of bullying than the general public. So it is a huge problem for half of our children to be targeted simply because of their faith for bullying. And as you mentioned, a third of the time, the bully is an administrator or a teacher. They're actually the adult in the room that is targeting the children. So we found very similar results 3 years ago, as you mentioned, in 2017, and this data point was very impactful in a lot of ways. So first of all, a school system, this is the one we know about. One school system in California actually forged an entire campaign, an anti-Islamophobia, anti-bullying campaign in the entire school system. It was a public school system to address this issue because of these numbers coming out. A second thing that happened is a major media outlet did a full-length segment on Islamophobic bullying, and we know that before our numbers came out, the reporter told her producer it was a problem and was told, I don't really see any evidence that it's anything but an anecdotal issue. When our data came out, then they were convinced and devoted 15 minutes, to a full segment on the topic. Another thing is the Boy Scouts took this up and took it seriously, and then implemented training around anti-bullying, specifically anti-Islamophobic bullying. Another thing that happened is the American Muslim healthcare professionals saw those numbers and wanted to partner with us and several other organizations to pull together an interfaith anti-bullying summit to discuss faith-based bullying and what to do about it as different faith communities. And those are just some of the things that came out of the fact that these numbers came out. The final thing I'll say is these numbers were also used in briefing Facebook when they were working on their anti-bullying, the summit report, as well as these numbers were used in advising Facebook when they were putting together their anti-bullying policy.
Mm. And that's important because, as we all know, especially when we're working on large topic like Islamophobia and the fact that Islamophobia kills, we've seen this across the world. Rising Islamophobia has resulted in genocide. This is a part of our work on a daily basis. And those messages, if they're taught to children at a young age, it makes a difference in the generations that are to come. So this is, thank you for that. One of the other major, questions from this finding that was surprising to people is your findings on white Muslims. Can you explain to us how were the questions chosen? What sort of questions were asked to come to some of these conclusions? The fact that one of the key findings that says that white Muslims reporting regular discrimination are more likely to have Islamophobic views. That's very surprising. It sits heavy on the heart as well. So can you tell us, one, how are the questions chosen, and two, who are white Muslims? How does the poll define white Muslims?
Okay, so lots to unpack there. So first of all, we certainly, in our work, we don't set out to single anyone out, but what we do is we ask a standard set of questions of all respondents of all backgrounds. And then we also ask demographic questions. And one of the questions is a standard question on the person's race and how they identify. So we don't assign a race identity to anyone because we can't even see them. This is all phone-based or internet-based. So we ask people just simply to identify what's their race. And the choices available are the standard choices on a census, plus we add Arab, which is not, of course, used on our census, on the American census. So people can choose to identify as white, Black, Latino, Native American, Asian, or Arab, or mixed race, right? So around 18 to 20% year after year after year will always identify as white. Who are white Muslims? Half of them, roughly half of them, say they were born in the United States. Half of them say they were born overseas. So some of them are white converts. Some of them are immigrants from countries like Turkey or Bosnia or Chechnya or Iran. All of these folks would identify as white. So what did we find? Basically, we found that Islamophobia was endorsing Islamophobic tropes among Muslims was higher among white Muslims. And we wanted to understand what was going on there. And we found something really strange that we're still trying to unpack, which is that that white Muslims were more likely than other Muslims, non-white Muslims, to report experiencing experiencing religious discrimination regularly. Okay, so that would intuitively maybe make you think you'd be less Islamophobic or more sympathetic to the Muslim community, but it actually was linked to endorsing anti-Muslim tropes even more if you experience regular religious discrimination. So it seems, what that suggests is that folks who experience regular discrimination because of their faith, one way that sometimes people handle that is by distancing themselves from the group that they're being, abused because of their membership of, and blaming other members of that group for making everyone look bad. And so that that may be what's going on with some of this. Why are white Muslims experiencing or perceiving to experience more religious discrimination than other non-white Muslims? We're not sure. One possible thought that's, so one theory was that if you are white, or if you're white passing and you're perceived as white, you're not going to experience as much discrimination for your race. So whereas, brown and black Muslims are experiencing discrimination, for lots of reasons. Women for their gender, and there's race, and then religious discrimination is just one of the many ways that they might experience it. Whereas white Muslims are going to perceive all of it as religious based. The other thing we found about Trump support, so it's related to this issue, is that 50% of white Muslims approve of the president's job performance, and they're twice as likely as non-white Muslims to hold this view, and they're also more likely to favor the president for winning the next election, not 50%, but more like 30%. But when we look at just Trump supporting Muslims overall, so who supports Trump in the Muslim community?
That's a big question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but even when we were discussing this amongst ourselves, that was, who are the Muslim Trump supporters?
Yeah, very popular question that we get quite often. So we did an in-depth analysis of these folks. So they're 14% of our community, okay, who say they want to see Trump win the next election. So it's the lowest of any faith community, but it is still 14% nonetheless. So we looked at them. And what we found is that they share a whole lot in common with Trump supporters in the general public. So some examples is they identify as Republican. That's not surprising. And about the same percentage of Muslims actually identify as Republican, 15%. And they support Trump. So that's one thing. Just like the general public, one of the biggest factors is that you are a Republican. The second thing that marked them or made them a little bit different is they were more likely to oppose building coalitions with Black Lives Matter. And more likely to favor building coalitions with religious conservatives working on religious liberty issues. They were also more likely to say that the economy was the most important issue for them politically. But there were some other things that were a little more there were other things that were maybe a little more surprising. One is that they were more likely to be white, similar to the general public. So Trump supporting Muslims are more likely to be white. And then they were also more likely to hold Islamophobic views, similar to the general public. So, the interesting and surprising thing is just how similar Trump supporting Muslims are to Trump supporters in general.
And this is something that we see in our work. And this is at this point also, Democrats should pay attention to this. So not to take the Muslim community for granted, because I feel like a lot of them do that, as we're hearing from what happened to Linda, other messages that were coming out of the DNC during the convention. Democrats should not be taking Muslims for granted. And especially this point that you made about religious liberties. A lot of the work that we do on the Uyghur cause or the Rohingya cause, Republicans have been very supportive. And some of the people who are working in those realms are worried that when Democrats come into power, will that support for religious liberty, religious freedom for Muslims around the globe, and specifically here in the United States, change? So this, and some of the other things when we talk.
Absolutely right, Hannah. You're absolutely right not to take the Muslim community for granted for several reasons. One is 33% are undecided. That's as of March and April. But still, it's the highest of any faith community that still said that they were still waiting or undecided. Another issue is, about 15% of Muslims say they don't even intend to vote. So there's swing voters in that they're both undecided, and some will just stay home, and that could really hurt the Democratic candidate in many key states. So no, taking Muslims for granted would be a huge mistake.
Definitely. I know we're going to be wrapping up the half hour pretty soon, so just a few. This one question, and Jeremy brought it up about, and I'd love to show his tweet, the comedian, about Catholics and Muslims show more support for political coalition building with pro-life, and it sort of ties in with what we were talking about earlier as well. I'd like to get your comment on that. Why, this is something that is this a change? And then the support for Black Lives Matter. So yes, if you could comment on those 2 points in the findings on political coalition building.
Yeah, this was one of the more surprising pieces for me, in that Catholics were only about a third of Catholics supported building coalitions with pro-life activists, because I guess we all think all Catholics are just all voting pro-life, et cetera, but it doesn't end up being the case. Here, Muslims are split almost right in half, 47% supporting it and the rest not supporting it. But it is interesting that they are more likely than Catholics to support building coalitions with pro-life activists. I think that it says more about maybe the complexity of the Catholic community than anything. American Muslims are, half of them do favor these kinds of coalitions, and they're really this is an issue that people are split on. It's very inaccurate to frame Muslims as one or the other. And I think that that's what this poll really underscores, is Muslims are basically as split on some of these hot button issues as is the nation as a whole. Not because they, I just want to emphasize this point. It's not because some people think, it's okay to have an abortion anytime during a pregnancy or something, and other people think it's not okay. It's much more a political question of what, is this a cause we should be getting behind, and who is behind this cause, and are these groups we should be working with? I think those are the questions that are going through a lot of people's minds. It's more around who should Muslims find common cause with. And when conservatives are often also spewing a lot of anti-Muslim rhetoric, even if someone might be pro-life, they might think twice about working with these people, with these activists, just simply because of how hostile they seem to be to our community.
That is, and this is, again, the complexity of the community, definitely. And I think it's also a rising awareness about coalition building, that you don't have to agree with someone on every issue. And if you're building a coalition based on one issue, and then you work on that and you leave. So I think that it's a little bit of maturity in our community as well, on what coalitions they would like to join and what they wouldn't like to join. So as we wrap up the hour, I leave it to you to what are you going to do with this information now?
Well, Hannah, I hope that it does. What I'd like to do with this information is get it out to as many people as possible, because what we are trying to do is inform dialogue and decision-making regarding the community. We want everyone working on the ground on any topic regarding our community to be well informed, to have the information they need to make good decisions. And if we can do that, then we're succeeding. But the real work is in the hands of practitioners and local community leaders, who we hope will take this information and implement it so that they're they're building programs and making decisions that are based on facts.
Well, thank you so much, Dalia, for being here with us today and for conducting this poll. And please follow those of you who are watching ispu.org, and you can download the report. You can read the report, use it for your work and for building community programs around this. I think a lot of times our own communities don't know as much. We assume from anecdotal evidence instead of looking at hard data. And so here's an opportunity to use that data and take it, we should be using this data and taking it to our mayors, our local city councils, our school boards. And really, next time your child comes and is being bullied, grab that report and go to your local principal. There's so many ways that data like this can be used by everybody. So thank you so much for your work, Dalia, and for being with us today. I'm going to, so for the rest of, for a lot of us, we have been looking at the reports coming out of India with the closing down of Amnesty International. The fact that Amnesty office in India has been shuttered is something that is egregious. We have a petition up on Justice for All's website that we urge everybody who believes in human rights to be signing. We're going to be sending this petition out to the Secretary of State, to the Canadian Prime Minister, because people need to realize what is occurring in India right now. So please visit justiceforall.org/stand with Amnesty India and sign the petition. Call your congresspeople. Let them know what is happening in India. The fact that Amnesty, which is a globally recognized human rights watchdog, had to shut down their offices after 2 years of constant harassment of staff by the Indian government, by the Delhi police, is something that is egregious, and all our congresspeople should know about that. So I urge you all to visit justiceforall.org/stand with Amnesty India. We're going to be having several shows coming up in the coming week, talking about India, talking about what is transpiring there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being with us. I know we have been, we've been exploring a lot of topics that concern you. But please do reach out to us at info@justiceforall.org and let us know, what would you like to hear on this show? Thank you so much from the team here. Assalamu alaikum.